Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Charles. Today's Italian folktale is It's Disturbing. This is a story that goes to show you just how far some men are willing to go to avoid an honest day's work. This is The Mason and His Son. There was once a mason who had a wife and son. One day, the king sent for the mason to build a country house in which to put his money, for he was very rich and had no place to keep it. The mason set to work with his son. In one corner, they put a stone that could be taken out and put back, large enough for a man to enter. When the house was finished, the king paid them and they went home. The king then had his money carted to the house and put guards around it. After a few days he saw that no one went there and took away the guard. Let us leave the king, who took away the guard, and return to the mason. When his money was gone, he said to his son, "Shall we go to the country house?" They took a sack and went there. When they arrived at the house, they took out the son, and the father entered and filled the bag with gold. When he had come out, he put the stone back as it was before, and they departed. The next day, the king rode out to his house and saw that his piles of gold had diminished. He said to his servants, "Who has been taking the money?" The servants answered, "It is not possible, your majesty, for who comes here? Where could they get in? It may be that the house is settled, being newly built." So they took and repaired it. After a while, the mason said again to his son, "Let us go back there." They took the accustomed sack and went there. Arriving as usual, they took out the stone, and the father entered, filled the sack, and they departed. The same night, they made another trip, filled the same sack again, and went away. The next day, the king visited the house with his soldiers and councilors. When he entered, he went to see the money, and it was very greatly diminished. He turned to his councilors and said, "Someone comes here and takes the money." The councilors said, "But your majesty, while you are saying so, one thing can be done. Take a few tubs, fill them with melted pitch, and place them around the walls on the inside. Whoever enters will fall in them, and the thief is found." They took the tubs and put them inside, and the king left sentinels and returned to the city. The sentinels remained there a week, but as they saw no one, they too left. Let us leave the sentinels who have departed, and return to the mason. He said to his son, "Let us go to the accustomed place." They took the sack and went. Arriving there, they took out the stone, and the father entered. As he entered, he stuck fast in the pitch. He tried to help himself and get his feet loose, but his hands stuck fast. Then he said to his son, "Do you hear what I tell you, my son? Cut off my head, tear my coat to pieces, put back the stone as it was, and throw my head in the river so that I shall not be known." The son did as he was told, and returned home. When he told his mother what had become of his father, she began to tear her hair. After a few days, the son, who did not know any trade, entered the service of a carpenter, and told his mother not to say anything, as if nothing had happened. Let us leave these two and return to the king, who went the next day with his councilors to the country house. They entered, and saw the body, and the king said, "But it has no head! How shall we find out who it is?" The councilors said, "Take him and carry him through the streets 3 days. Where you see weeping, you will know who it is." They took the body, called Filippo Carubo, and Brasi Vuturo, and made them carry it about. When they passed through the street where the mason's widow lived, she began to weep. The son, whose shop was nearby, heard it, and gave himself a blow in the hand with an axe and cut off his fingers. The police arrested the mother, saying, "We have found out who it is." Meanwhile, the son arrived there and said, "She is not weeping for that. She is weeping because I have cut off my fingers and can no longer work and earn my bread." The police saw it was so, believed him, and departed. At night, they carried the body to the palace and built outside a scaffold to put the body on, because they had to carry it around 3 days. About the scaffold they placed 9 sentinels, 8 soldiers, and a corporal. Now, it was in the winter and was very cold, so the son took a mule and loaded it with drugged wine and passed up and down. When the soldiers saw him, they cried, "Friend, are you selling that wine?" He said, "I am." "Wait until after we drink, for we are trembling with the cold." After they had drunk, they threw themselves down and went to sleep, and the son took the body and, after he had buried it outside the town, returned home. In the morning, the soldiers awoke and told the king what had happened, and he issued a proclamation that whoever found the body should receive a large sum of money. The body was found and carried about the street again, but no one wept. That night new sentinels were appointed, but the same thing happened as the night before. The soldiers were drugged and dressed in monks' robes, and the corporal had a cross stuck between his legs. The next day another proclamation, the body found again and carried about, but no one detected weeping. The story continues. The mason's son, here called for the first time Ninu, could not rest, and went to Cianera. "Will you do me a favor?" "If I can," answered Cianera, "not one, but 2. What can I do for you?" "Will you lend me your goats this evening?" "I will." Ninu took them, brought 4 rotella of candles and an old earthen pot, knocked out the bottom and fastened some candles around it. Then he took the goats and fixed 2 candles to the horns of each one, and took them where the body was, and followed with the pot on his head and the candles lighted. The soldiers ran away in terror, and the son took the body and threw it into the sea. The next day, the king commanded that the price of meat should be set at 12 tarie rotella, and ordered that all the old women of the city should assemble at the palace. 100 came, and he told them to go begging about the city and find out who was cooking meat, thinking that only the thief could afford to buy meat at that price. Ninu, of course, brought some and gave it to his mother to cook. While it was cooking, and Ninu absent, one of the old women came begging, and the widow gave her a piece of meat. As she was going downstairs, Ninu met her, and asked what she was doing. She explained that she was begging for some bread. Ninu, suspecting the trick, took her and threw her into the well. At noon, when the old women were to present themselves to the king, one was missing. The king then sent for the butchers, and found that just 1 rotolo of meat had been sold. When the king saw this, he issued a proclamation to find out who had done all these wonders, and said, "If he is unmarried, I will give him my daughter. If he is married, I will give him 2 measures of gold." Ninu presented himself to the king and said, "Your Majesty, it was I." The king burst out laughing and asked, "Are you married or single?" He said, "Your Majesty, I am single." And the king said, "Will you be satisfied with my daughter or with 2 measures of gold?" "Your Majesty," he said, "I want to marry. Give me your daughter." So he did, and they had a grand banquet. That is The Mason and His Son, again from Thomas Frederick Crane. And man, there are some truly messed up parts to this tale. From the father and son who feel it necessary to steal directly from the king, to the father asking the son to cut off his head and the son going along with it, all of the burial and exhumations of the father's body, the son, seeing that he might get a trick played on him throwing an old woman down the well. That one is especially dark to me. And then immediately afterwards, the king rewards him with, as was apparently the tradition, his daughter. So many parts of this story are just wrong. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can also head over to patreon.com/folktaleproject if you'd like to support the podcast. And for as little as $1 a month, you'll get early access to every story told. As always, thank you so much for listening.